A bitter gust of wind swept through the grand hall, shaking the window panes like the unsettling tremors in Derek Walker's heart. The room was silent, save for the occasional rustling of pages from his legal briefs scattered on the table. The air seemed to hold a heavy weight, one that matched the burden in Derek's chest. It had been a year since he lost everything: his wife, his business, and now his dignity. The divorce papers he had just signed were not just the end of his marriage, but the final blow to the life he had once built. All the ambition, all the success, had collapsed into a hollow shell of failure. And then, at that very moment, the sound of laughter echoed from the grand ballroom outside his office door. He had heard it 1,000 times before. The mockery, the voices of the elite he had once mingled with, now throwing jokes and jabs at his expense. But today it stung deeper. Today, it felt like they were laughing at the empty man he had become. He stood up abruptly, crumpling the divorce papers in his hands, his thoughts a whirlwind of frustration and pain. But then, he heard it. A single note, pure and unmistakable, coming from the grand piano at the far end of the room. The music, a long, drawn-out melody that seemed to tug at something deep inside him. Curious, Derek slowly made his way to the piano, his mind 1,000 miles away from the present. But when he turned the corner into the ballroom, what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The grand ballroom was filled with the glitter of chandeliers and the hum of idle conversation. At its center, a luxurious piano gleamed under the soft lighting. Standing beside it was none other than Olivia Thornton, the heiress of a vast fortune, her eyes gleaming with playful challenge. "If you can play this piano, I'll marry you," she said with a mocking smile, her voice laced with a dare. The room erupted in laughter. Derek, the once respected businessman turned janitor after losing everything, had become the punchline of their cruel game. Olivia's words were meant to humiliate him. She knew the man who had once been so powerful now swept the floors and cleaned the rooms. A master of the corporate world reduced to this. Derek, shaking with a mix of anger and heartbreak, wanted to walk away. But something inside him, a whisper of forgotten pride, kept him standing there, frozen. He had been knocked down, humiliated by life in ways that were too much to bear. But this was different. The piano, the instrument that once represented everything he had lost, now called to him. He knew he had been betrayed by his wife, by his business partners, and by his own ambitions. But in this moment, Derek wasn't just facing a challenge from Olivia. He was facing himself. The room fell silent, the weight of Olivia's dare hanging in the air. "Do you think you can still play?" she asked, her voice dripping with mockery. Derek closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the silence, the brokenness, the memories of who he once was. And then, he walked toward the piano, his fingers trembling, not with fear, but with the need to prove something to himself. The first few notes were shaky, but as his fingers danced across the keys, the music began to flow through him. And suddenly, the mocking laughter stopped. The melody began to build. A gentle, mournful tune at first, then a wave of emotion that cascaded through Derek's soul. Each note he played was a step toward reclaiming something he thought he had lost forever: his passion, his hope, his connection to who he used to be. The room fell into a stunned silence as Derek played with the intensity of someone who had lived a lifetime of sorrow. The music was raw, unfiltered, a reflection of his inner chaos. Yet, as he played, a transformation began to take place. As the melody swelled and built to its crescendo, Olivia stood frozen, her face now unreadable. The other guests were silent, their earlier laughter replaced with awe. Derek was no longer the broken man they had ridiculed. He was the musician, the artist, the person who had once loved life and who, for the first time in a long while, was beginning to love himself again. When the final note echoed in the room, there was no sound but the soft thrum of his heartbeat in his ears. Derek exhaled deeply, his fingers still resting on the keys. For the first time in a long while, he felt whole. Olivia stepped forward, her face a mixture of shock and admiration. "I didn't know you could play like that," she whispered, her voice softer than he had ever heard. "I didn't either," Derek replied, his voice steady, but filled with a deep, quiet understanding. As he stood there, surrounded by stunned silence, Derek realized that this moment, this challenge, was never about proving anything to Olivia. It was about proving something to himself, that no matter how far he had fallen, he could still rise again. Moral of the story: true healing doesn't come from external validation or proving others wrong. It comes from within, from rediscovering your own worth, from embracing the pain of the past and using it as fuel to grow. Healing is a journey, often slow and difficult, but each small victory brings you closer to emotional peace and self-acceptance. The power to overcome life's hardships lies in your ability to reconnect with what makes you truly whole, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. Moral: never let others define your worth. True strength comes from within, and through self-acceptance and growth, you can transform your life, no matter how many times you've been knocked down.